For 20 years, one man carried the biggest secret in his small town, and 1,000 children would finally reveal the truth. The Ellen DeGeneres show was in full swing at the Warner Brothers studio in Burbank, with Ellen radiating her characteristic warmth as she moved across the stage in her signature white button-down and navy blazer. The audience of 300 was buzzing with excitement, their energy filling the familiar studio space that had become synonymous with hope and human connection. Behind Ellen, the iconic backdrop displayed its trademark blue sky, dotted with white clouds and swaying palm trees, while the famous white chairs, with their sleek black wooden legs, waited for another afternoon of heartwarming conversation. "Welcome back, everybody," Ellen called out as the opening music faded, her infectious smile lighting up the studio. "We have such a special show for you today. I'm about to bring out someone who has spent the last 20 years doing something that I think defines what it really means to make a difference in this world. And the story I'm about to share with you is going to change the way you think about family, about love, and about the impact one person can have on hundreds of lives." The studio buzzed with anticipation as camera operators adjusted their angles, and the production team prepared for what they sensed would be an emotional segment. It was Thursday afternoon, and everything was running with the polished efficiency that had made Ellen's show a masterpiece of television storytelling for nearly 2 decades. In the green room, 58-year-old Frank Morrison sat quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap as he tried to process the surreal fact that he was about to appear on national television. Frank had driven school buses for the Maplewood County School District for 20 years, and in all that time, he had never imagined that his simple job would lead him to this moment. He was a man of few words, someone who preferred actions to speeches, but today he would have to find the words to explain something that had taken him completely by surprise. Frank had never married, never had children of his own. It wasn't for lack of wanting. He had always dreamed of being a father, of having a house full of kids and family dinners and Little League games. But life had taken different turns. His long-term relationship had ended when his girlfriend decided she wanted different things. His subsequent attempts at dating had never quite worked out. By his 40th birthday, Frank had quietly accepted that fatherhood wasn't in the cards for him, but what Frank hadn't realized was that he had been a father all along. For 2 decades, Frank had driven Route 47 for the Maplewood County Schools, covering a 15-mile circuit that took him through 3 different neighborhoods twice a day. His bus was always the cleanest in the fleet, decorated with seasonal decorations that Frank put up himself. He knew every child by name, remembered their birthdays, celebrated their achievements, and offered quiet comfort during their struggles. Frank's bus wasn't just transportation, it was a safe haven. He had a strict no-bullying policy that he enforced with gentle but firm authority. Kids who were having problems at home found a listening ear in Frank. Students who were struggling academically received encouragement and sometimes tutoring during the longer rides. Frank kept Band-Aids for scraped knees, tissues for tears, and somehow always had an extra lunch for kids whose parents forgot to pack one. Over the years, Frank had driven more than 1,000 different children. He had watched kindergartners grow into high school seniors, had seen shy kids blossom into confident young adults, had been present for first days of school, last days before summer vacation, and everything in between. But Frank had never thought of himself as particularly special. He was just doing his job, treating the kids the way he hoped someone would treat his own children if he had any. Last month, Frank had submitted his retirement paperwork. After 20 years of 5 a.m. wake-up calls, icy winter roads, and the controlled chaos of managing dozens of energetic children twice a day, he was ready to step back. The school district had planned a small retirement party, nothing fancy. Cake in the break room, a few speeches from administrators, a plaque thanking him for his years of service. But word of Frank's retirement had spread through the community in ways he never expected. Parents started calling the school district. Former students, now adults with children of their own, began reaching out. Teachers who had worked with Frank over the years started sharing stories. What emerged was a picture of a man who had quietly become one of the most beloved figures in the entire community. The retirement party that was supposed to be a small affair in the break room had grown into something much larger. The school district had to move it to the gymnasium to accommodate all the people who wanted to attend. More than 400 people showed up, current students, former students, parents, teachers, and community members, whose lives Frank had touched in ways he never realized. But the most surprising moment came when Mrs. Henderson, a second-grade teacher who had worked with Frank for 15 years, stood up to speak. She had with her a large box that she could barely lift onto the podium. "Frank," she had said, her voice carrying across the packed gymnasium, "we have something for you. Every year I've asked my students to write thank you cards to the special people in their lives. For 15 years, more cards have been written to you than to anyone else. Parents, grandparents, teachers, they all got cards, but you got the most." Mrs. Henderson had opened the box to reveal hundreds of handwritten cards from children spanning 15 years, card after card expressing gratitude, sharing memories, and saying things that took Frank's breath away. "Thank you for being like a dad to me on the bus. You always make me feel safe. When my real dad left, you showed me that grown-ups can still be nice. You're the best father I never had." As Mrs. Henderson read card after card, Frank had begun to understand something that everyone else in the community had known for years. He hadn't failed to become a father. He had become father to hundreds of children who needed exactly what he had to give. The moment that had brought Frank to tears and ultimately to Ellen's show came when a current high school senior named Marcus Williams had stood up in that gymnasium and spoken directly to him. "Mr. Frank," Marcus had said, his voice shaking with emotion, "I want you to know something. When I was in 3rd grade, my parents got divorced and I was angry all the time. I was mean to other kids, I was failing in school, and I felt like nobody cared about me. But every morning and every afternoon you would greet me by name, ask me how I was doing, and somehow you always knew when I needed to hear that things would get better." Marcus had paused, wiping his eyes. "You probably don't remember this, but one day when I was crying on the bus, you told me that sometimes the best families aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose to be part of. You said that even though you didn't have kids of your own, you felt like every kid on your bus was part of your family." The gymnasium had been completely silent as Marcus continued. "Mr. Frank, I need you to know that you were wrong about not having kids of your own. You have thousands of kids, and we all love you like the father you've always been to us." That's when the entire gymnasium had erupted in applause, with hundreds of people, from 6-year-olds to adults in their 30s, who had once been Frank's passengers, standing and clapping for a man who had spent 20 years believing he had missed out on fatherhood, not realizing he had been the most prolific father in his community's history. A production assistant appeared at Frank's side. "Mr. Morrison, you're up in just a minute. How are you feeling?" Frank looked down at the small stack of cards he had brought with him, just a few of the hundreds he had received at his retirement party. "Nervous," he admitted. "I'm not used to talking about myself." "Please welcome Frank Morrison," Ellen announced, and Frank walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The audience immediately embraced this gentle, unassuming man as he made his way to the white chairs. Frank moved with the careful dignity of someone who had spent decades being responsible for children's safety, and Ellen could see immediately why kids would have felt secure under his care. "Hi, Frank," Ellen said warmly, settling into her chair across from this remarkable guest. "Thank you so much for being here. I understand you just retired after 20 years as a school bus driver." "Yes, ma'am," Frank replied, his voice quiet but steady. 20 years driving Route 47 for Maplewood County Schools. "And I also understand that your retirement party turned into something pretty special," Ellen prompted gently. Frank's face lit up with a mix of pride and amazement. It sure did. I thought it would just be cake and coffee in the break room, but it turned into something I never could have imagined. "Tell me what happened," Ellen said, leaning forward with genuine interest. Frank took a deep breath. "Well, they had to move it to the gymnasium because so many people came. Current students, former students, parents, teachers. And then Mrs. Henderson. She's a wonderful teacher I've worked with for years. She brought out this big box of cards that kids had written over the years." Ellen's eyes were already beginning to soften with emotion. "What kind of cards?" "Thank you cards," Frank said simply. "But they weren't just polite thank yous. They were—" He paused, struggling to find words. "They were children telling me that I had made them feel safe, that I had been like a father to them." The studio had grown quieter as the audience began to understand the depth of this story. "Frank," Ellen said gently, "you never had children of your own, did you?" Frank's voice grew thick with emotion. "No, ma'am. That was always my biggest regret. I always wanted to be a father, to have a family, but it just never happened for me." Ellen reached over and placed her hand on Frank's arm. "But it sounds like you were a father to hundreds of children." "That's what they told me," Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All these years I thought I was just driving a bus. But these kids, they saw something different. They saw someone who cared about them, who looked out for them." Ellen was fighting back tears now. "What was it like to realize that you had been a father all along, but just didn't know it?" Frank wiped his eyes. "It was overwhelming. All those years I felt like I had missed out on the most important thing in life. But these children, they showed me that I hadn't missed anything. I had just been a father in a different way than I expected." Ellen made a decision that would define this moment forever. "Frank, I understand you brought some of those cards with you today. Would you share one with us?" Frank carefully pulled out one of the cards from the small stack beside him. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. "This one is from a girl named Sarah. She wrote it when she was in 5th grade, but she's in college now. She came to the retirement party to give it to me in person." Frank began to read. "Dear Mr. Frank, I know you probably don't remember me, but you changed my life. When my mom and dad fought every morning before school, getting on your bus was the best part of my day. You always smiled and asked how I was doing, and you made me feel like someone cared. When I felt invisible everywhere else, you saw me. Thank you for being the dad I needed when I couldn't find one anywhere else." The studio was completely silent except for the soft sounds of people crying. Ellen wiped her eyes, completely moved by the pure love expressed in this child's words. "Frank," Ellen said, her voice thick with emotion, "that little girl was right. You were the dad she needed. You were the dad all of these children needed." Frank nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I never thought of it that way. I just wanted every child to feel safe and cared for." Ellen stood up from her chair and moved to sit directly next to Frank. "That's exactly what being a father means. It's not about biology or paperwork or even living in the same house. It's about showing up every day and making children feel safe and loved and valued." She turned to address the camera directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man spent 20 years believing he wasn't a father, when in reality he was one of the greatest fathers his community has ever known. He taught us that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who cares, who makes a difference in the lives of children who need someone to believe in them." The audience rose to their feet in spontaneous applause, recognizing that they were in the presence of someone who had lived out the truest definition of love and service. Ellen looked back at Frank. "How does it feel now, knowing that you were a father to so many children?" "It feels like coming home," Frank said simply. "All my life I thought I was missing something, but I wasn't missing anything. I was just looking for it in the wrong place." The episode aired exactly as it happened, becoming one of the most emotionally powerful segments in Ellen's show history. Within hours, the clip was being shared across social media with the hashtag #JustBusDadFrank, as viewers shared their own stories of adults who had stepped into parental roles in their lives. But the real impact came in the weeks that followed. Frank, who had thought his retirement would be quiet and anonymous, found himself inundated with messages from former students he hadn't heard from in years. Adults who had once been children on his bus reached out to tell him how his kindness had shaped their lives, how his daily dose of caring had gotten them through difficult times, how his example had taught them what it meant to treat children with respect and love. 6 months later, Frank returned to Ellen's show with an update that brought even more tears of joy. He had started volunteering at a local elementary school, reading to children and helping with after-school programs. But more than that, he had embraced his identity as Bus Dad Frank, understanding finally that he hadn't missed out on fatherhood. He had simply practiced it on a scale larger than most people ever get the chance to experience. "Any regrets about retiring from driving the bus?" Ellen asked during his return visit. "None at all," Frank said with a smile. "I spent 20 years learning how to be a father. Now I get to spend the rest of my life enjoying it." Because sometimes the most profound families are formed not through birth certificates or adoption papers, but through the daily choice to show up, to care, to make children feel valued and safe. Frank Morrison had spent 20 years believing he wasn't a father, when in reality he had been practicing the purest form of fatherhood possible, loving children not because he had to, but because he chose to. In a television studio that day, a school bus driver became a symbol of unconditional love, and 1,000 children's voices echoed the same truth. The best fathers aren't always the ones who share your DNA, but the ones who share your journey and make you feel like you matter every single day.